This module describes some of the commonly used Agile approaches. And these approaches can be used as is or combined with other approaches to adapt to what works best for a given environment or situation or project. It is not necessary to use any of these. An Agile approach can be developed from scratch as long as it adheres to the mindset, values, and principles of the Agile Manifesto. If the Agile principles are followed to deliver value at a sustainable pace, and the developed approach promotes collaboration with the customer, a specific approach is not required. So I'm going to give you some of these and we'll just work our way through them. Today we'll be discussing my methodology selection process that I use to build this lecture, Scrum, the Kanban method, which will likely be the method most of you are somewhat familiar with, but maybe you just don't know the name for it. We'll talk about extreme programming. We'll talk a little bit about the crystal methods, something called feature-driven development, or FDD. And lastly, one of my personal favorites, the dynamic systems development model, or DSDM. After today's lecture, you should be familiar with and be able to describe key Agile methodologies and principles, compare Agile approaches for project needs, apply Scrum and Kanban for workflow management, evaluate project complexity using Agile methods, and then analyze trade-offs in Agile project planning. There are way too many Agile projects or Agile approaches and techniques that could possibly be included in this class, much less in this lecture. So the chart here depicts a sample of Agile approaches based on their depth of guidance and sort of the breadth of their life cycles. The specific approaches selected for this lecture are popular examples that are designed for holistic use, formalized for common use, or are popular in modern use. So to sort of break this down a little bit, some of the Agile methods that are designed for holistic use are really important because some Agile approaches are centered on a single project activity, such as estimation or maybe even just reflection. The listed examples here include only the more holistic Agile frameworks. Some are more full-featured than others, but all of these selected approaches are those intended to guide a broad set of project activities. And then also I've looked specifically for methods that are formalized for common use. Some Agile frameworks are proprietary in nature and designed for specific use by oftentimes a single organization or within a very specific or single context. The frameworks described in this module focus on those intended for common use in a variety of contexts. And then I've also looked for Agile frameworks that are popular in modern use today. Some Agile frameworks are holistically designed and well formalized, but are simply not commonly being used in most projects or organizations. So the Agile frameworks described in this module have been adapted or adopted by a significant number of industries and measured by a collection of industry surveys. Now, something that I do want to point out at this moment in time is in the syllabus for the class, you have your required textbook, which is the PMBOK, and then I've included some optional textbooks. But below that, I've included some textbooks for further learning. And all of those go a little bit deeper, maybe not only into Agile. I've included some that are process-based or some that are like Lean or Six Sigma-based. But a lot of those books, if you want to learn about a specific subset because you think that that'll be specific to your industry, like software development, for example, you might consider looking into those books because those are going to have a lot more content in there and you can dig a little bit deeper. So Let's jump into our first method, which is Scrum. I'm sure many of you have heard of this method. There's even a TikTok going around right now that is something along the lines of being a Scrum Master at a corporate job, and it's like, what is a Scrum Master? What does a Scrum Master even do? Who gave you that name, Scrum Master? And it's kind of cute. So, but it's also relevant because it's such a weird name. So if you're anything like me, you've probably spent some time not really knowing what it was. So the Project Management Institute describes Scrum in their Agile Practice Guide as a single team process framework used to manage product development. That simple. The Scrum framework consists of Scrum roles, events, artifacts, and rules, and uses an iterative approach to deliver a working product. Now, all of those are a little bit formal. In my experience, I've worked on several Scrum projects and with several Scrum teams. I've never once used those terms. So different organizations, different teams may use a similar process or may sort of combine other Agile methodologies into their approach. Like I said, you don't even need to use an approach. You can kind of make your own. So a lot of Scrum has been really, really formalized. Don't let that hang you up. Scrum is run on time boxes. That is a really important one. Oftentimes those time boxes are generally 1 month or less. Usually a 2-week sprint is pretty common within Scrum, but you want consistent durations, and those durations are called sprints. So if you hear the word sprint, don't get stressed. It's literally just saying we're working in a specific time box, and that time box can vary depending on the project or the organization, typically less than a month. Now, those sprints are where a potentially releasable increment of product is produced. So if you're working on a design team, let's say that you are working on a website, and within that one iteration, maybe you were able to get 1 page designed. So it's not necessarily focused on the whole product. It's focusing on chunks of a product. The table here lists Scrum events and artifacts utilized for project execution. Again, in my over a decade of working in this industry, I have never once used some of these terms except for like a daily Scrum or a sprint review. Retrospectives, we use those all the time, but like formalizing it with sprint in front of it, it gets a little fuzzy. So find a language that works for you as long as it makes sense to the team. Don't get too stuffy about it. The Scrum team, on the whole, consists of a product owner, a development team, and a Scrum Master. To break this down a little bit, the product owner is responsible for maximizing the value of the product. It's that simple. They are typically the person who's just keeping track of things, making sure that the product is going forward, making sure that the team is delivering what stakeholders are asking for. The development team is really a cross-functional, self-organizing. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Self-organizing is really important, but the development team is cross-functional, self-organizing team consisting of team members who have everything that they need within the team to deliver a working product without depending on others outside of the team. So just because this says development team, that does not mean that it is solely comprised of software engineers or web developers. The key phrase there is cross-functional, self-organizing team who has everything they need within the team. So this means if you are an illustrator working on a Scrum project, you're on a development team. If you're a print designer working on a Scrum project, you're on the development team. If you're a photographer, software developer, copywriter, business analyst, the list goes on for days here. If you're someone working on a Scrum project and you're not the product owner or the Scrum Master, which frankly the Scrum Master usually is still part of the development team, then you are on the development team. It can get a little bit confusing, but by and large, most people are going to be on the development team. And lastly, the Scrum Master is responsible for ensuring the Scrum process is upheld and works to ensure the Scrum team adheres to the practices and rules, as well as coaches the team on removing any impediments that come along the way. Oftentimes, the Scrum Master has a little bit of a project management background, maybe more so than a product owner might have. And really, they are focused on improvement more than anything else. Now, switching gears a little bit, we were just talking about one Agile process called Scrum. Now we're going to talk about what's called flow-based Agile. Another term for that would just be Kanban. And Kanban might be the most versatile, if you ask me. And frankly, all of you have probably used some variant of a Kanban board at some point in your careers, either professionally or perhaps even as students. It's really valuable for students. Kanban in lean manufacturing is a system for scheduling inventory control and replenishment. Okay, that's a little odd. Why am I telling you that that's important for you as students? This process of what's called just-in-time inventory replenishment was originally seen in grocery stores when shelves were restocked based on the gaps in the shelves and not based on supplier inventory. They were sort of inspired by these just-in-time delivery and inventory systems. The Toyota manufacturing facility developed their own version of Kanban in 1953. The word Kanban literally translates as visual sign or card. Physically, Kanban boards with cards enable and promote the visualization and flow of the work through the system for everyone on the team to see. This, what's called information radiator, or simply just a large display, is made up of columns that represent the stages the work needs to flow through in order to get things done. This is actually an example of the Kanban board or the information radiator that they have at the original Toyota manufacturing facility in Japan. The simplest of boards could have 3 columns. In one example would be to do, doing, and done. Those don't need to be that way, but that is sort of a common starter setup, is just to have 3 columns: to do, doing, and done. But again, that process or those columns, or sometimes you'll hear them called swim lanes, those are adaptable to whatever states are deemed to be needed by the team that's using this information radiator or this Kanban board. But be careful, because too many stages can really quickly get teams feeling like they are working in a more sequential or waterfall method when you really don't want that to be the case. The Kanban method is utilized and applicable in a number of settings and allows for a continuous flow of work and really is aimed at bringing value to the customer. Again, remember, that is one of the key components of the Agile Manifesto. The Kanban method is much, much less prescriptive than some Agile approaches. You don't need a Scrum Master. Really, anyone can do it. It's kind of the nice thing about Kanban. But being less prescriptive, they also are less disruptive to begin implementing, as it's sort of the original start where you are method. Organizations can really quickly begin applying Kanban methods with relative ease, very little investment, and work towards progressing towards fully implementing the method if that is what the team deems to be necessary or appropriate for their project. But unlike most Agile approaches, the Kanban method does not prescribe the use of time-boxed iterations. Iterations can be used within the Kanban method if the team would like to use them, but the principle of pulling single items through the process continuously, and maybe even in some cases limiting the amount of work that can be in any given column, like for example, limiting the amount of work in progress, just helps optimize the flow, and really all of that should remain intact, just so that the team knows what steps come in place. You can move cards back and forth between each section, but having that cadence really helps keep the team prepared for what's coming and limits the amount of work that's in progress. And then increased efficiency is also important. Checking each task for value adding or non-value adding activities, and then removing the non-value adding activities to sort of optimize the workflow is really critical here. Team member focus is another one where Kanban might be best used. Sort of limited work in progress allows the team to focus on the current work at hand. And then variability in the workload. When there is unpredictability in the way that work arrives, I'm sure we've all had a stakeholder run by our desk and just plop a paper down or ask you, hey, can you do this thing? Great, wonderful, see you on Friday, kind of thing. It becomes really, really difficult for teams to make predictable commitments, even in short periods of time. So Kanban sort of helps line that thing up within the workflow so that no one's working on any sort of ancillary tasks. And then reduction of waste. Transparency makes waste visible so it can be removed or eliminated, and maybe not by the person who is sort of being wasteful. It can just be sort of eliminated from the top down or even from the bottom up. If you jump in a time machine with me for a moment and think back to lecture 2.2 where I showed you this slide, it's important to remember that while Kanban is an agile methodology, it is primarily derivative of lean thinking, which we'll cover a little bit in another module. This table shows the defining principles and core properties of the Kanban method. The Kanban method is a holistic framework for incremental evolutionary processes and systems change for organizations, I should say. The method uses a pull system to move the work through the process. When the team completes an item, the team can pull an item into that step. Here's actually an interesting example. Kanban boards, like this one, are very, very low tech. They can just be whiteboards with sticky notes, frankly. But they're also a very high touch technology, meaning that you should be able to interact with them very, very frequently. That may seem overly simplistic at first, but those using them soon begin to realize the power that they have. Utilizing policies for entry and exit columns can be a really interesting strategy with Kanban boards, as well as constraints such as limiting work in progress. Kanban boards can provide very clear insights into a project's workflow, the bottlenecks that are getting experienced at any particular stage in the process, any blockers, and just give an overall status just by looking at it can be really helpful. Additionally, the board acts as, similar to Toyota, an information radiator to anyone who sees it, providing up-to-date information on the status of the work of the team. So long as the team remains responsible about updating their task statuses. As a project manager myself, one of the things that I've gotten in the habit of doing is just going around to team members once or twice a week and being like, hey, have you updated your tasks? It's a really nice way to just like kindly not micromanage, but still be like, hey, check your tasks because I'm not able to get a status from the Kanban board. and that can be really detrimental or set you back a little bit. In the Kanban method, it is more important to complete work than it is to start new work. I'll let you simmer on that for a little bit. There is no value derived from work that is not completed, so the team really has to work together to implement and adhere to work in progress limits, or sometimes called WIP limits, WIP. And as a team, get each piece of work through the system towards done. So it's not about like, oh, you were responsible for this thing, you have to do it. If you get to it before that other person does, great, check it off. That's what Kanban's all about. Moving on to our next method, this is called extreme programming, or XP. Extreme programming is a software development method based on frequent cycles. That should sound somewhat familiar. There's nothing unique there, but the name is based on the philosophy of distilling a given best practice to its purest, simplest form and applying that practice continuously throughout the project. XP is most known for popularizing a holistic set of practices intended to improve the results of software projects. And the method was first formalized as a set of 12 primary practices, but then gradually developed to adopt several other corollary practices. And these are listed here. The evolution was the result of designing and adopting techniques through the filter of core values: communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and respect. And they're informed by key principles, very much like the Agile Manifesto, but even further developed. Principles like humanity, economics, mutual benefits, self-similarity, improvement, diversity, reflection, flow, opportunity, redundancy, failure, quality, baby steps, and accepted responsibility. Then, sort of moving on to another method here, you have the Crystal family of methodologies. Crystal methodologies are designed to scale and provide a selection of methodology rigor based on project size. Typically, that project size is based on the number of people involved in the project and the criticality of the project. So it can be a little bit hard to define the project size sometimes, but thankfully, we have a nice chart for that. You'll realize that project management has a lot of charts. Crystal methodologies are designed to scale and provide a selection of methodology rigor based on project size. So, Crystal methodologies realize that each project may require a slightly tailored set of policies, practices, and processes in order to meet the project's unique characteristics. The family of methodologies use different colors based on the weight of the project to determine which methodology to use. The use of the word crystal comes from the gemstone, where the various faces represent underlying core principles and values. Think of it like a birthstone kind of thing. The faces are a representation of techniques, tools, standards, and roles that are listed in this table here. An important note for this table is that, one, more of these properties are in a crystal-based project, or let me rephrase that. The more that these properties are in a crystal-based project, the more likely it is for that project to succeed. Now, those were the four most common Agile methods, so now we're in the bonus round. Feature-driven development was created to meet the specific needs of a large software development project. However, there are also applications outside of software development, but based on what I know about feature-driven development, and to be very clear, I've never actually used feature-driven development, so this would be a great one. If you want to know more about this, check out one of those optional books that I've thrown in there. Features In the simplest possible definition, you're going to hear me use that term several times as we go throughout the course, but features in the simplest possible definition relate to a small business value capability. In other words, a feature is a very concise and well-defined functionality within a product that delivers a specific value to the business. But it also represents a small, manageable piece of work that contributes directly to fulfilling a business goal or requirement. Features are typically framed in terms of user-centric capabilities, what the system allows the users or allows the stakeholders to accomplish. So for example, in an e-commerce platform, a feature might be the ability to search for products by a specific keyword, or adding an item to the shopping cart. Each feature is small enough to be implemented and tested somewhat quickly, but is meaningful enough to create tangible value once it's deployed. This focus on delivering incremental business value is no different than most Agile methods, but is sort of the key cornerstone of feature-driven development, which can also be called FDD for short. And that focus on features is really only there to ensure that development efforts are aligned with the needs and properties of the business and brings value to the customer. Sound familiar? This is why I've really narrowed us down into Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, and Crystal as our main avenues for Agile. Everything else, in my opinion, and there will be plenty of people who disagree with me, but everything else is really just some form of variant or combination of those four methods that I covered originally. And we're seeing that here in FDD. It's really just a repackaged version of Scrum, or just sort of a slightly different version of Agile. Moving on. There are 6 primary roles on a feature-driven development project where individuals can take on one or more of the following roles. There is a project manager, there is a chief architect, a development manager, chief programmer, class owner, and domain expert. And then a feature-driven development project is organized around 5 processes or activities which are, again, performed iteratively. You develop an overall model, you build a features list, you plan by feature, design by feature, build by feature. Again, a lot of that is rinse and repeat of what we've already covered in much of the Agile process from the previous lecture. So again, just rinse and repeat here. If you ask me, this is just massively overcomplicated, and it overcomplicates and attempts to create a more rigid structure around something that is by definition meant to remove structure and create more lateral flexibility. So frankly, this particular one's not my favorite, but it certainly has its applications. If you feel like the application for this is going to be prevalent in your industry, highly, highly, highly recommend checking out one of the books in the recommended books list. And just to give you a quick sort of 10,000-foot view of what this life cycle looks like, these are those development activities built out into a workflow. So something for you to check out here. Now, feature-driven development activities are supported by a core set of software engineering best practices. Domain object modeling, developing by feature, individual class ownership, feature teams, inspections, configuration management, regular bids, and visibility of progress and results. Now, to be completely fair, I'm not a software engineer, so that also means that I may not like this particular approach because I don't have many practical applications for it to be used. So that said, don't just throw this one out because I said I don't care for it. Make a decision that's appropriate for the project. Moving on again. The Dynamic Systems Development Method, or DSDM, is an agile project delivery framework initially designed to add more rigor to existing iterative methods that became popular around the 1990s. Then it was developed as a non-commercial collaboration among industry leaders at the time. Now, frankly, if you ask me, this one is useful all the time. I use it all the time. And frankly, if you have me for other classes, you'll hear me repeat this methodology in a number of different ways. And I generally use this model for every project and typically don't view it as its own workflow, but rather simply as a good practice to keep in mind. Although backwards design is an entirely separate concept, DSDM really facilitates that process, if you ask me. In a traditional approach, the foundation of the project often begins with two questions. How much time is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? Then, using those two questions, the team is able to build the features around the organization's time and budget constraints. With DSDM, that whole process gets turned upside down. And that question then becomes, what are we trying to build, or what functionality are we trying to achieve or implement? Then the team works backwards by solving for those functions without sacrificing quality and flipping the bill at the end. Obviously, this approach has its challenges when it comes to selling the product. So that is where the team's proof of execution comes into play, typically through very, very similar case studies that the team has completed successfully in the past. Now, during your time here at ASU, again, if you have me for a lot of other design classes, you're going to hear me reference this a lot. Sometimes I call this the triangle, and I show you this graphic in multiple different ways. You have this one, which I've already walked through with you a little bit, or I may show it as a Venn diagram like this one. Here I sort of explain that working in the industry is like walking a trade-off tightrope. As graphics industry or visual media industry professionals, our goal is primarily to balance time, cost, and quality. And in some cases, that quality can be swapped for another term called scope of work. I will always tell you that you have to pick two because you simply cannot have all three. If you choose for your product to be affordable and delivered quickly, the work will not be of high quality. Obviously, this deviates from DSDM a bit, since quality is not a sacrificial element in DSDM. But if you choose quality work with quick delivery, that project is not going to be cheap. And lastly, if you choose quality work and affordable cost, I'm going to take my sweet ass time getting through the work and trying to get it done. But again, having all three simply is not possible. This is economics. This is how this works. And then I may show it to you in its simplest form, like this, and say something as simple as you can pick two, but you can't have all three. And this here is called the time, cost, quality pyramid. It is a necessary evil of every single project, but frankly, it's the only tool we have as creative professionals or project managers to keep clients in check regarding the realism, or frankly, the lack thereof, of our stakeholders' expectations. Similar to feature-driven development, DSDM is guided by 8 principles. Focus on the business need, deliver on time, collaborate, never compromise quality, build incrementally on firm foundations, develop iteratively, communicate consistently and clearly, and demonstrate control using the appropriate techniques. Awesome. You made it. I know that was a long one. And like I said, we only saw the tip of the iceberg here. If you want more, check out the books on the recommended book list. There's dozens of Agile variants out in the world. When you enter the workforce, you may encounter something I have not even covered here, or you may encounter a project where none of these work. That's okay. Don't panic. Frankly, if you encounter something I've not covered, chances are that chances are that it may not even be an agile process, or that it is some variant or combination of what I've shared with you today.